The Kingdom of Mali was a remarkable African empire, renowned for its wealth, governance, and cultural influence. Its success stemmed from its control of trade routes, particularly in gold and salt, which connected it to North Africa and beyond. This brought wealth and facilitated the spread of Islam, establishing Mali as an intellectual center, especially in cities like Timbuktu. The rule of Mansa Musa, known for his pilgrimage to Mecca, showcased the empire's prosperity. Mali's influence declined due to internal conflicts and external pressures, but its legacy endures in African and Islamic history. Mali is predominantly Islam, being the main religion by about 90% of the population. Islam arrived in Mali through trade routes and has deeply influenced the country's culture, architecture, and education. Major cities like Timbuktu became centers for Islamic learning and scholarship, and Islamic traditions continue to play an important role in Mali's societal and political life. Mali was one of the early centers of education in West Africa, especially during the Mali Empire. Cities like Timbuktu housed prestigious universities and libraries, making it a leading hub for learning and scholarship, particularly in Islamic studies. The region's focus on education and intellectualism, especially with the translation of texts into Arabic, helped spread literacy in the area long before it became widespread in other parts of the world. This historical significance in reading and learning is a testament to Mali's cultural and academic legacy. Mansa Musa, the famous ruler of the Mali Empire, did not directly inherit the throne from his father. Instead, he became emperor after his predecessor, his brother, died during a pilgrimage to Mecca. Musa's reign is especially known for his wealth and the extravagant pilgrimage he made to Mecca, which showcased Mali's riches to the world. His leadership helped expand the empire and its influence, particularly in trade and culture. Mansa Musa's brother, who is often believed to have been his predecessor, was likely named Suleiman. Suleiman, who was initially the ruler, died during a pilgrimage to Mecca, leaving Mansa Musa to ascend to the throne. Musa's reign is famous for his wealth, his promotion of education, and his extravagant pilgrimage in 1324, which brought global attention to the Mali Empire. During Mansa Musa's famous pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, he distributed vast amounts of gold along the way. His generosity was so extensive that it caused inflation in the regions he passed through, especially in Egypt. This display of wealth drew global attention to the Mali Empire, highlighting its immense prosperity. Musa's actions on this journey not only cemented his place in history, but also showcased the economic power of Mali at its height. Mali remains one of the poorest countries in the world, facing significant challenges in terms of economic stability and development. The country has been grappling with political instability, exacerbated by coups in recent years, which have strained its international relationships and hindered economic progress. While it has seen some economic resilience, the socio-political climate is volatile, and its growth potential is limited by factors like corruption, a high poverty rate, and political unrest. The economy is heavily reliant on the informal sector, and the country struggles with high inflation, particularly due to disruptions in supply chains and external shocks like the war in Ukraine. Mali's fiscal situation is challenging, with substantial public debt and a growing budget deficit. However, international organizations like the IMF are working with the government on reforms aimed at improving fiscal stability and social protections for the vulnerable. Overall, Mali faces a complex mix of obstacles, including fragility in governance, corruption, and a young, rapidly growing population. While some growth initiatives have been made, such as infrastructure and agricultural projects, the road to economic prosperity remains long and uncertain. Mali's transition from a once prosperous empire to a country grappling with poverty can be attributed to several factors, both historical and modern. In the medieval period, under rulers like Mansa Musa, Mali was one of the wealthiest empires in the world, mainly due to its control over gold and salt trade routes. The empire thrived through its strategic position, intellectual hubs like Timbuktu, and its cultural and economic dominance in West Africa. However, the decline of the Mali Empire began as it faced internal struggles, such as succession disputes and invasions by neighboring powers. The empire's wealth and power diminished significantly, especially after the 16th century. The loss of control over trade routes and the emergence of European colonial powers further weakened Mali's influence. In the modern era, Mali gained independence from France in 1960, but the political instability that followed played a major role in the country's economic downturn. After gaining independence from France in 1960, Mali did not have to pay a formal colonial debt like some other former French colonies. However, France maintained economic and political influence over Mali through mechanisms like the CFA franc currency system and trade dependencies. Mali's first president, Modibo Keïta, initially pursued socialist policies and cut ties with France, but economic struggles and political pressure led to a coup in 1968 that brought a more pro-France government to power. After gaining independence in 1960, Mali, under Modibo Keïta, pursued a socialist path, breaking away from the French-controlled CFA franc and adopting its own currency, the Malian franc. This move aimed to assert economic independence, but led to financial instability and inflation, partly due to France's economic pressure. In 1968, Keïta was overthrown in a coup led by Moussa Traoré, who re-established closer ties with France. France continued to exert influence through economic policies, trade agreements, and military cooperation. The CFA franc was reinstated in 1984, bringing Mali back under France's monetary control. Additionally, France maintained a presence in Mali through development aid, military partnerships, and business investments, ensuring continued influence over the country's economy and politics. In recent years, tensions between Mali and France have grown, especially with the rise of anti-French sentiment and France's military intervention in Mali against jihadist groups. This led to Mali's government distancing itself from France, expelling French troops, and strengthening ties with Russia. Mali's post-independence relationship with France has been complex, marked by economic dependence, political influence, and military intervention. After Modibo Keïta's socialist policies led to economic struggles, his overthrow in 1968 paved the way for Moussa Traoré's military regime, which aligned Mali more closely with France and international financial institutions. This alignment reinforced French influence through economic aid, trade agreements, and Mali's return to the CFA franc system in 1984. During the 1990s, Mali transitioned to democracy, but France remained a key player in its economic and security affairs. French companies controlled significant sectors like mining, telecommunications, and agriculture. However, Mali continued to face poverty and instability, which France and other international donors addressed through financial aid and development programs, often with conditions that reinforced French economic interests. In 2013, France launched Operation Serval, a military intervention to push back jihadist groups that had taken over northern Mali. This evolved into Operation Barkhane, a long-term counter-terrorism mission in the Sahel. While France framed its intervention as support for Mali's security, many Malians viewed it as neo-colonial interference. Over time, tensions grew, fueled by accusations that France was not effectively combating terrorism and might even be prolonging instability for strategic reasons. By 2021, a series of military coups in Mali led to a nationalist shift, with the new government rejecting French influence. In 2022, Mali expelled French troops and turned to Russia's Wagner Group for military support, further straining ties with France. The Malian government also withdrew from regional organizations historically tied to French influence, signaling a move toward greater independence. Mali's recent political direction has been marked by a strong push for sovereignty, distancing itself from France and Western influence, while strengthening ties with Russia and other non-Western allies. After the military coups in 2020 and 2021, Colonel Assimi Goïta emerged as the key figure leading Mali's transition. His government has emphasized national pride, anti-colonial rhetoric, and self-reliance, which has resonated with many Malians frustrated by years of foreign intervention without significant improvements in security or economic conditions. One of the most notable shifts has been Mali's growing partnership with Russia. The Malian government expelled French troops in 2022 and replaced them with the Wagner Group, a Russian paramilitary force, to help combat jihadist groups. In return, Mali has reportedly provided Russia with access to natural resources, such as gold. Russian influence has also extended to political support, weapons supplies, and media narratives that reinforce anti-French sentiment. Mali has also distanced itself from ECOWAS, Economic Community of West African States, an organization often seen as aligned with France and Western interests. In 2024, Mali, along with Burkina Faso and Niger, two other countries that have experienced military coups, announced their withdrawal from ECOWAS. These three nations are now forming a new regional alliance focused on mutual defense and economic cooperation, further reducing French and Western influence in the region. Economically, Mali has sought to diversify its partnerships, increasing trade with China, Turkey, and the Middle East. However, challenges remain, including economic instability, ongoing insurgencies, and questions about whether Russian support can provide long-term security. Mali's trajectory suggests a continued break from its colonial past, but the future remains uncertain. Will Russian and other non-Western partnerships truly empower Mali, or will they create new dependencies? That's something many are watching closely. Mali faced multiple military coups, with the most recent one occurring in 2021, which further destabilized the country. These political crises often led to poor governance, corruption, and a lack of investment in infrastructure and social services. The instability has hindered foreign investment and the development of critical sectors, such as agriculture and mining. Moreover, Mali's location in the Sahel region, which is prone to droughts and conflicts, has compounded the country's poverty. Climate change has also worsened agricultural conditions, affecting food security. Coupled with ongoing armed conflicts involving rebel groups and terrorist organizations, these factors have contributed to Mali's economic struggles. Despite international aid and efforts to reform its economy, including projects supported by organizations like the World Bank, Mali continues to face significant challenges. The country is heavily dependent on foreign assistance, and its informal economy, along with an over-reliance on mining, has limited sustainable growth. Mali's colonization by France began in the late 19th century, during the period known as the Scramble for Africa, when European powers divided up large parts of the African continent for exploitation. France took control of the region, which was then part of a larger area known as French Sudan in the 1890s. This was part of France's effort to consolidate its empire in West Africa, where it sought to gain access to valuable resources like gold, cotton, and other agricultural products. Before colonial rule, the area now known as Mali was home to several powerful empires, including the Mali Empire, which thrived in the medieval period. However, by the time of French colonization, Mali had experienced significant decline and fragmentation, making it vulnerable to European control. France integrated Mali into its colonial administration, and the region was part of French West Africa, a federation of 8 French colonial territories. During the colonial period, Mali, like many other African countries, was subjected to harsh economic exploitation and cultural assimilation policies. The French imposed a system of forced labor, which exploited local populations for the benefit of the French economy. There were also efforts to spread the French language and culture, often at the expense of local traditions. Mali gained independence from France on September 22, 1960, after a long struggle for self-rule, led by figures like Modibo Keïta. This marked the end of French colonial rule, though the effects of colonialism still lingered, particularly in terms of economic dependency and the creation of national borders that often ignored ethnic and cultural divisions. Yes, slavery existed in Mali, both before and during its time as part of the Mali Empire. Slavery was practiced in the region, particularly within the empire's social structure, where captives from wars or raids were often enslaved. The Mali Empire, which was at its peak between the 13th and 15th centuries, utilized enslaved people for agricultural labor, military service, and as domestic workers. These individuals were typically prisoners of war or people from conquered territories. Slavery continued in various forms after the fall of the Mali Empire, during the French colonial period, and even into the modern era. French colonialists, like other European powers, also employed a system of forced labor, which had characteristics similar to slavery, especially in the agricultural and mining sectors. This system of exploitation persisted into the mid-20th century. Slavery in Mali, like in many parts of Africa, was historically tied to social and economic structures, with some regions and groups participating more than others. While the practice of slavery has been outlawed in modern Mali, human trafficking and forms of servitude still persist in some areas, despite efforts to combat it. Several leaders played crucial roles in Mali's resistance against French colonial rule and in the fight for independence. Among the most prominent were 1. Modibo Keïta. Keita was a key figure in the independence movement. As a leader of the Sudanese Union, a political party that advocated for independence, Keita became Mali's first president after the country gained independence in 1960. His vision was for a united and socialist Mali, and he played a pivotal role in the transition from colonial rule to independence. 2. Seydou Keita, not to be confused with Modibo. Seydou Keita was an important anti-colonial figure involved in the struggle for independence. He was active in the political movements that advocated for the rights and freedoms of Mali's citizens under colonial rule. 3. Moussa Tavelle, a prominent intellectual and politician, Tavelle was known for his resistance activities against French policies and his commitment to the anti-colonial struggle. These leaders, along with many others, helped shape the political landscape of Mali during its fight for independence from France, which was eventually achieved on September 22, 1960. Their work continues to be celebrated as foundational to Mali's modern political and social identity. In addition to Modibo Keita, several other leaders played crucial roles in Mali's resistance against French colonial rule, contributing to the country's eventual independence in 1960. Some notable figures include 1. Lamine Senghor. A key figure in Mali's political landscape, Senghor was instrumental in the early nationalist movements and resistance against colonial rule. He was involved in organizing protests and rallies that laid the foundation for independence movements. 2. Seydou Badiane. As a prominent member of the Sudanese Union, Badiane worked closely with Modibo Keita and others in organizing opposition to French colonial policies and in rallying support for Mali's self-determination. 3. Yambo Owologum. Although more widely recognized as a writer, Owologam's works were also part of the intellectual resistance against colonialism, influencing the broader cultural and political movements within Mali. 4. Aminata Diop. She was part of the early nationalist movements and worked with other activists to challenge the French colonial presence, particularly focusing on women's involvement in the fight for independence. These figures, among many others, contributed to various nationalist organizations and movements, often facing repression from the French government, but eventually leading to the formation of an independent Mali. Several leaders and freedom fighters played significant roles in Mali's resistance to French colonial rule. Here is a list of several key freedom fighters and resistance leaders from Mali who fought against French colonial rule. 1. Modibo Keita, the most prominent figure in Mali's struggle for independence. Keita was a founding member of the Union of the Sudanese People, USRDA, which was crucial in organizing the independence movement. He became Mali's first president after independence in 1960. 2. Seydou Badiane Kouyaté, an intellectual and nationalist, Badiane was an influential member of the USRDA. His political activism and leadership in the early stages of the independence movement. 3. Lamine Senghor, a significant leader in Mali's nationalist movement. Senghor was active in both political and social mobilization against French colonialism, particularly focusing on the political rights of the Malian people. 4. Aminata Diop, a notable female figure in the anti-colonial struggle. Diop participated in political activism and organizing protests against French policies. 5. Alou Coulibaly, a political leader and one of the main members of the Union of the Peoples of the Sudanese Federation. He advocated for the independence of Mali and other West African territories under French rule. 6. Moussa Tavelle, an intellectual and nationalist leader. Tavelle worked against colonial policies and promoted anti-colonial ideas. He was influential in Mali's early resistance movement. 7. Teokoro Sissoko, an influential figure in Mali's rural political movements, Sissoko was involved in organizing resistance to French rule among the peasantry, particularly in the agricultural sector. 8. Amadou Hampâté Bâ. Although more widely recognized for his work in anthropology and preserving African oral traditions, Hampâté Bâ was also involved in the anti-colonial intellectual movement. His writings helped inspire nationalist thought across West Africa. These figures, among others, contributed to the mobilization and eventual independence of Mali, using a combination of intellectual activism, grassroots organizing, and political leadership to challenge colonial domination. Their efforts were key in the broader struggle for self-determination across French West Africa. Mali, like many African regions, did not willingly allow French colonization. The process of French control over Mali was marked by military conquest, exploitation, and manipulation. Several factors contributed to the eventual takeover by France, many of which were part of the broader dynamics of European imperialism during the 19th century. 1. Weakening of the Mali Empire. By the time French forces arrived in West Africa, the once powerful Mali Empire, which had thrived from the 13th to 16th centuries, had already declined. Political fragmentation, internal conflicts, and external pressures, such as invasions by neighboring empires, weakened the region, making it vulnerable to foreign influence. The rise of the Segu Empire and the Tukulur Empire created competition within the region, which weakened Mali's overall ability to resist external forces. 2. French expansion and imperialism. France, along with other European powers, was deeply involved in the scramble for Africa, a period when European nations sought to expand their territories on the continent. In the late 19th century, France established colonial control over much of West Africa, including Mali, which was then part of a larger area called French Sudan. The French used military force, diplomacy, and economic control to gradually extend their authority over the region. By 1890, France had secured control over most of Mali, despite resistance from local kingdoms. 3. Military conquest. The French colonization of Mali was facilitated by a series of military campaigns. French forces, led by figures like Louis Archinard, systematically defeated local leaders and kingdoms. The Battle of Nioro, 1890, where French forces defeated local rulers, marked a key victory that ultimately led to Mali's inclusion in French colonial holdings. 4. Divide and rule. The French employed a divide and rule strategy, which capitalized on existing ethnic and political divisions among Mali's various peoples. They used local leaders to collaborate with their colonial government, often co-opting existing power structures and undermining traditional leadership. 5. Economic exploitation. Like other European colonial powers, France sought control over the region's resources. Mali, which had rich agricultural lands, gold deposits, and a central location in West Africa, was strategically important to the French. The imposition of colonial rule was largely driven by the desire for economic exploitation, including access to resources and control over trade routes. While some local rulers initially tried to negotiate or cooperate with the French, the resistance was eventually overwhelmed by superior military force and the pressure of global imperial ambitions. The French, through both military and diplomatic efforts, gradually established colonial rule in Mali, leading to its integration into French West Africa. This colonization ultimately lasted until Mali's independence in 1960. Mali's fight against French colonialism was deeply shaped by a series of dedicated leaders, intellectuals, and activists who made lasting contributions to the country's path to independence. Here are some additional figures and insights into their roles. 1. Modibo Keita. As one of the most pivotal leaders, Keita was the founder of the Sudanese Union, African Democratic Rally, USRDA, which became the central political party advocating for Mali's independence. Keita's commitment to socialist ideals shaped the newly independent Mali, and he worked tirelessly to unite the country and promote a pan-African vision. Under his leadership, Mali achieved independence on September 22, 1960. Becoming the first French-speaking African nation to gain independence from France. His presidency laid the foundation for Mali's early post-colonial governance, even though it faced economic challenges. 2. Seydou Badiane Kouyaté. A key figure in Mali's intellectual and political resistance, Badiane was a major advocate for decolonization and was heavily involved in shaping Mali's nationalist discourse. His political activities, including his work with the USRDA, helped consolidate Mali's fight for independence and establish a pan-Sudanese vision, which sought to unite the people of the region. Badiane also contributed to Mali's cultural renaissance post-independence through literature and activism. 3. Lamine Senghor. A prominent resistance leader, Senghor was crucial in leading various political movements against French imperialism. His efforts focused on gaining political rights for the people of Mali, especially emphasizing the needs of the rural population. Senghor was also a key member of the USRDA and helped foster greater awareness of the colonial exploitative structures that plagued the people of Mali. 4. Aminata Diop. As one of the few prominent women in the resistance movement, Aminata Diop played a significant role in raising awareness about the social injustices caused by French colonial policies. She fought for women's rights and their active participation in the fight for independence, which was a critical part of the broader nationalist movement. 5. Teokoro Sissoko. Sissoko's work was mainly in the countryside, where he helped mobilize peasants and agricultural workers against the exploitative practices of the French colonial system. His focus on rural areas gave him a unique role in the anti-colonial struggle, as he understood the importance of securing the support of the majority of Mali's population in the fight for independence. 6. Amadou Hampâté Bâ. Although Hampâté Bâ is best known for his work in preserving West African oral traditions and his contributions to anthropology, he was also an intellectual force in the resistance against colonialism. His writings and speeches critiqued French cultural assimilation policies, and he advocated for the restoration of African cultural identities. His thoughts and works became part of the intellectual underpinnings of the nationalist movements across French-speaking Africa. 7. Alou Coulibaly, a leader in the Union of the Peoples of the Sudanese Federation. Coulibaly was a central figure in advocating for unity among the various nationalist movements across French West Africa. His advocacy for the independence of Mali, as well as other French colonies in the region, helped push the boundaries of African solidarity in the face of European imperialism. These leaders, alongside others, formed a diverse and powerful resistance movement in Mali, which ultimately led to independence from French rule in 1960. Their efforts, ranging from political activism and intellectual resistance to organizing mass mobilizations, paved the way for a new independent nation. Though Mali continues to grapple with the legacy of colonialism and its challenges in governance, economic development, and social cohesion. The French granted Mali independence in 1960 after pressures from nationalist movements, shifts in French political attitudes, and the broader decolonization wave across Africa. Several key factors contributed to this decision. 1. Nationalist movements. From the 1940s onward, nationalist movements in French West Africa, including Mali, then known as French Sudan, gained significant momentum. The Sudanese Union, African Democratic Rally, USRDA, led by Modibo Keïta, was a major force advocating for independence. These movements were increasingly vocal in demanding self-determination and challenging colonial rule. This grassroots resistance made colonial governance increasingly difficult and expensive for the French. 2. French political shifts. After World War II, France underwent significant political changes, especially with the establishment of the Fourth Republic in 1946. The new French government was more open to addressing the demands of its colonies, and many French politicians began to recognize that maintaining colonies was becoming both morally and politically untenable. Following the end of World War II, France was focused on rebuilding its economy, and it recognized that its colonial empire was no longer an asset, but a growing liability. 3. Decolonization pressure. The post-war period saw a global wave of decolonization. In response to the increasing demand for self-rule, France eventually agreed to grant Mali full independence on September 22, 1960. 5. Internal and external pressure. France was also dealing with multiple challenges across its empire. Mali's independence came about as a combination of strong local movements, changing French policies, and the broader wave of African decolonization. This was a time when France, recognizing the inevitability of change, opted to peacefully transfer power in many of its African colonies, including Mali. There were several instances of resistance and rebellion against French colonial rule in Mali, then part of French Sudan, prior to the country's independence in 1960. 1. The Bambara resistance. The Bambara people, who lived in the central part of what is now Mali, were particularly resistant to French colonization. Starting in the late 19th century, the French launched military campaigns to suppress the Bambara kingdoms, including the powerful kingdom of Ségou. The most notable figure in this resistance was Biton Coulibaly, the ruler of Ségou, who initially fought against the French encroachment. Although ultimately defeated, the Bambara resistance persisted through guerrilla warfare tactics well into the early 20th century. The Bambara, along with other ethnic groups, resented the imposition of French rule and the harsh treatment they suffered. 2. The Wassoulou resistance, 1880s to 1890s. Another significant episode of resistance occurred under the leadership of Samori Touré, a powerful military leader who founded the Wassoulou Empire in the late 19th century. Touré's forces waged a protracted war against the French for almost 20 years, resisting French attempts to control the region. Though he was eventually captured in 1898 and exiled to Gabon, his resistance inspired generations of Malians to resist French rule. His efforts are remembered as a symbol of national pride and defiance against imperialism. 3. The Sudanese Union, African Democratic Rally, USRDA. While not a military rebellion, the USRDA, led by Modibo Keïta, was one of the most significant political movements against French colonial rule. Established in 1946, the USRDA advocated for autonomy and independence for French Sudan and the broader region. The movement staged strikes, protests, and political campaigns to challenge colonial rule and demand independence. Their resistance was non-violent, but highly effective, as it mobilized masses of people against French control. 4. Labor strikes and protests. In the 1940s and 1950s, French Sudan saw a wave of labor strikes and protests, often fueled by dissatisfaction with French economic policies, such as forced labor and the exploitation of local resources. These protests, while not organized as traditional rebel wars, were crucial forms of resistance that increased pressure on the French colonial government. While Mali did not experience large-scale conventional rebel wars in the way that Algeria did, these forms of resistance, whether led by individual military leaders like Samori Touré or organized political movements like the USRDA, were crucial in the eventual decolonization of the region. They demonstrated both the military and political determination of the people of Mali to achieve self-rule. The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885 was a crucial moment in the history of European colonialism in Africa. Convened by German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck in Berlin, the conference aimed to establish ground rules for the European powers to divide and colonize Africa. The conference was attended by representatives from 14 European nations, including Germany, Britain, France, Portugal, Belgium, and others. No African leaders were invited to the event, and the outcome disregarded the sovereignty and cultures of African peoples. The key points of the Berlin Conference were the partitioning of Africa. The European powers agreed on dividing Africa into territories with clear borders for each nation. The goal was to avoid conflicts between European powers as they expanded their colonial holdings in Africa. The principle of effective occupation. This rule required European nations to establish a physical presence and effective control in the regions they claimed, which justified military occupation and the suppression of local resistance, leading to long-lasting conflicts. It intensified the scramble for Africa, where European countries competed to acquire colonies, often using violent means to suppress indigenous populations. It contributed to the colonization of Mali by France and many other African regions, laying the groundwork for the exploitation of Africa's resources and people under European rule. The conference symbolized the height of European imperialism, and its legacy continues to shape the political and social landscapes of Africa today. The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, which regulated European colonization and trade in Africa, was attended by representatives from 14 countries. These nations were 1. Germany, host and organizer; 2. France; 3. United Kingdom, Britain; 4. Portugal; 5. Belgium; 6. Italy; 7. Spain; 8. Netherlands; 9. Denmark; 10. Sweden, Norway; 11. Russia; 12. Austria-Hungary, Turkey, Ottoman Empire; 14. United States, attended as an observer but did not participate actively in territorial claims. The conference aimed to resolve conflicts over imperial claims and establish guidelines for the orderly division of Africa. The absence of African representation and the disregard for indigenous borders and governance systems created lasting consequences for African political and social landscapes. Yes, Mali is a landlocked country, meaning it has no coastline or access to the sea. Located in West Africa, it is surrounded by other countries: Algeria, Niger, Burkina Faso, Côte d'Ivoire, Guinea, Senegal, and Mauritania. Being landlocked poses challenges for Mali's economy, especially in trade, as it must rely on neighboring countries for access to ports and international shipping routes. This geographic limitation affects Mali's ability to directly import and export goods, often necessitating overland transportation through other countries. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more content, and leave a comment below. See you next time.